Hi folks, my name is Adam and I like to make tiny nerdy things. And for the life of me, I can't remember the last time I made a shark, so let's you and I make a shark together. Like any good shark project, this one starts with a lump of clay rolled into a slightly oblong lump of clay that gets a little face cut into the front of it. I'll then refine the shape of the face, removing some clay from the inside of the mouth and building up the surrounding area. Once I've got a rough shark-faced shape, I can jam a tube into its open maw, which will give me a general idea of how big the cannon's gonna be. Oh yeah, this is gonna be a shark with a cannon sticking out of its mouth because, of course it is. Now once I've made my metal cannon into a clay cannon, I can then fit that back into the shark's mouth and remove the bottom jaw. I didn't really have a plan per se as to what kind of a cannon shark this was going to be, but once I added the cannon, I figured, why stop there? Why not make this cannon shark a proper cyborg shark with a cannon in its mouth? Thus the removal of various fleshy shark sections that can be replaced with chunks of metal and cyborgy bits. I figured I could make the bottom and back parts of the shark robotic while leaving the top half mostly unmolested. A couple divots for eyeballs will give my shark some eyeballs, then a couple quick sniffing holes, and I'm right back to popping one of those eyeballs out so I can replace it with a spooky glowing cyborg eyeball. However, before I do that, I need to really gnarly up the surrounding area, so I'll poke lots of little divots and add plenty of scars and tears in the skin, before popping that oversized robo-orb in place and adding some final battle damage. Once he's appropriately damaged up, I can stick a couple little wires into the surrounding area, and it's time to give my shark some teeth. I'll do this by adding some extra oversized gums to the top of the bottom jaw, then sticking some pre-baked triangles in until I've got a full set of shark teeth. With my mouth looking adequately menacing, I can then work my way around the rest of the body, adding gnarly texturing, scars, scrapes, cuts, and gouges everywhere that the metal bits connect to the fleshy bits. I figured if somebody's making a cyborg shark and putting a cannon in its mouth, then they're probably not concerned with ensuring the highest quality end result. Thus, this shark is gonna be kinda gross looking. To that end, I'll take my knife to that end and remove a significant section of the shark so that I can replace it with even more metally bits. I also thought the sides were a bit too clean, so I'll pop some extra little lumpy bits onto the sides that will become the eventual exhaust pipes. Finally, back to the face, I made a spooky metal bottom jaw that will give my shark a full mouth, then it's into the oven to bake so I can start adding all the extra bits. I'll drill some holes in the shark's button belly so that I can insert a couple lengths of armature bone, which I can then wrap the fin bones in some fin-shaped clay and the butt bones in a little rectangular tube that I can cut and shape into a couple segmented sections. Then some refining and shaping will turn these sections into sort of a robotic-looking shark spine, and I can fit a fin on the back and a fin on the top. Of course, the top fin will be a fleshy fin, so I need to blend that into the body and add an appropriate amount of battle damage and scarring. Finally, a final fin on the back, and I can start to work my way around the cyborgy bits, adding lots of little greeblies and semi-random blobs of clay to make it look extra robotic. The trick here is to overwhelm the senses with so much stuff that you don't have a chance to consider whether any of it actually serves a real purpose. Of course, this is a cannon mouth cyborg shark, so reality checked out about 3.5 minutes ago. Finally, after a final bake, I'll drill some little holes along the body so that I can insert some varying thicknesses of armature wire bent into straight lines, which will act as little tubes and pipes. With that, this cyborg shark is finished and ready for a coat of white primer. Now with a lovely white base coat base coating the base of the shark, I'll start to layer on several layers of very thin, very washy grayish blues on the top of the body and some lighter off-white whites on the bottom, blending the two at the edge. Once that's dried, I'll tickle the tips of the exposed bits with a variety of reds and pinks and everything in between to make all the cuts and gouges extra gross before giving all the metallic bits a bit of metallic with a duraluminum. This stuff is the tits and covers completely in a single coat, but it's perhaps a bit too clean and it blends in a bit too much with the gray of the shark body, so I'll change the hue by top coating it with a sepia ink, followed by a silver dry brush to bring out the edges. Finally, I'll lean into the poorly designed design decisions and add a copious coat of rust effects to imply that whenever they built this underwater monstrosity, they used a non-rust proof material, and maybe that's why he's so angry. I can then paint the healthy eye black and the cyborg eye red with a glowy white bead in the middle. Finally, the teeth will get a couple coats of bone white followed by a bright white wet blended in to create a nice clean toothy gradient. Of course, I'm not going to make a cannon-mouthed shark without some cannonballs, which I've made by baking a little black size-appropriately ball painted with some grays and charcoals. This particular ball is going to be blasting out of the shark's mouth, so I'll mount it on an acrylic rod before breaking out my clear silicone caulking to make the bubbles. I want to give the cannonball plenty of momentum, and adding bubbles behind it should do just that, but intentionally adding localized bubbles to resin is an absolute ball ache, so I'm going to see if I can't fake it with a little silicone magic. I've mixed the silicone aggressively, agitating and aerating it to make it extra foamy and bubbly, at which point I can start to drape it around the acrylic rod. Once it's cured, I'll then coat it in a thin layer of UV resin. In previous experiments, I've found that silicone embedded in resin as it cures turns an opaque white, which would hide all my hard-won bubbles, so hopefully by covering it in UV resin, I can keep the bubbles visible even as the resin sets. I can then attach the cannonball bubble rod to the shark's mouth with a bit of UV resin. Finally, I've given the shark a coat of high gloss varnish to keep the paint from leaching into the resin, but I thought it might actually make for a kinda cool effect if it leached out of the wounds, so I'll fill each of the big cuts with a thick coat of red wash to try and intentionally make it happen. Otherwise, that's my shark finished, so it's time to make a tank. Normally I'd make this out of MDF boards, but apparently I ran out, so I'm gonna have to make do making my walls and floors out of thin sheets of clay. I considered foam, but I didn't want to chance the resin melting the foam since it gets hella hot as it cures. Since the shark's going to be blasting a cannonball at the wall, I thought it might be kind of fun if I had a glass window that was on the verge of shattering, so I made the left-hand wall with a big round window. Then a couple of extra strips of fat clay wrapped around the roundness will make it a little fancier looking, and I can start adding the tiles to the floor in the back wall. I considered making the interior of the tank metallic or science fiction-y looking, but opted instead for a sort of repurposed swimming pool with white tiles, since that's more fun to make and kinda goes hand in hand with the poor craftsmanship of the shark. Once the tiles have been laid out, I can chop a few choice squares out to make it look a little bit more battered and dilapidated before cutting a big rectangle out of the bottom bit so I can fit a grate in place. I've cut a bunch of kebab skewers to length, which I'll glue in place, then cover with a little frame of clay before popping it into the oven to bake so I can start the painting. I'll give the tiles a nice white base coat using my airbrush to keep from having to apply umpteen coats, then I'll give the base a quick splash of water and dab away the excess. The idea here is that the water will fill the grout lines so I can dip some blackish ink into the corners, which will hopefully spread along the grout line. In a perfect world, I'd do this with an oil wash since that stuff creeps along recesses in an almost magical way, but I ain't got time to wait for oil washes to dry, and I don't think pouring resin over half-dried oil is a great idea. So instead, I need to figure out ways to make acrylics work since they tend to dry in a couple of minutes. Of course, that being said, I still got impatient doing this and tried to rush it thinking I could just wipe away the excess and, well, of course it made a horrible mess. However, instead of crying, repainting, and trying again, I just decided to lean into it and go ham with the staining, and, well, I think it actually looks better than if I tried to do this on purpose, which is kind of how this channel works. I tend to fail upwards a lot of the time. Otherwise, with the tiles white and worn, I can paint all the metallic bits with that same duraluminum. I can then glue my edges together with a bit of CA glue to form my weathered and worn shark tank before attaching a handful of little bits I made off camera. I figured the back wall was a bit boring, so I made some little pipes out of wooden dowel and clay and painted them steel, as well as making a little wall-mounted ladder. To help the metal stand out from the dirty white of the walls, I'll give the non-pipe parts that same sepia wash that the shark got, while the pipe parts will get an oily black wash. Once that had dried, all the metallic bits got a healthy coat of rust, and the tiles got a couple streaky, runny, watery washes with greens, browns, and oranges. Otherwise, once that dried, I gave the entire tank a couple coats of high gloss varnish to lock the paint in place, and I'm ready to add the resin. I've already made 4/5 of a form-fitting form to fit my tank into, so all I need to do is add the front wall and seal it with a bead of hot glue. Also, off camera, I added an entire tube worth of silicone caulking just to be safe. I'll then drop a couple spare cannonballs onto the base where the shark's been shooting his balls at the window before mounting my shark in place. I've threaded a single strand of clear fishing line through his fin dead center so he floats horizontally without needing any extra supports. All that's left to do at this point then is mix up my resin. Doing a little internet-based math, I calculated I'll need just under 4 liters of resin, and the only bucket I have that can hold that quantity is this ill-used bucket that I've used before. Now I should probably use a clean bucket, but I like to live dangerously. This is a 2-part epoxy resin, so I've marked out how much of each part I'm going to need, then I can give it a quick initial mixing before adding some color by way of blue ink and green ink. Then another mix, and I'm ready to pour. Except this sucker is pretty bubbly, which I'm going to need to fix, which is where this delightful little machine comes into play. This is my vacuum chamber, which, as the name implies, does a vacuuming. Basically, it pulls a hell of a lot of air out of the chamber, which in the case of the resin, pulls all the bubbles up and out, leaving me with a lovely, relatively bubble-free resin ready to pour. One thing I hadn't accounted for, though, is that the silicone bubbles weigh less than the resin, which means the cannonball is floating up to the surface, tipping my shark upwards. Slightly annoying, but it should be easy enough to fix by looping another fishing line under the shark's tail to help balance it out. Unfortunately, this is now the hardest part of the entire process, which is leaving it alone for 72 hours while the resin cures. I made it about 24 hours before trying to pop some bubbles with my torch, which of course melted the fishing line. Fortunately though, the resin had set enough that the shark was supported enough that it didn't make a difference. I can't help myself. A full 72 hours later though, the resin is set and I can remove the mold. And I gotta say, that resin-coated bubble worked an absolute treat. You can still see a couple spots where I must have missed the resin coating, but it's otherwise kinda awesome. And the little pocket of air around the bubble just makes it look like the bubbles are expanding. On the other hand, for the first time ever, the red wash didn't leach into the resin, presumably because I wanted it to. For the side of the window, the resin is beautiful and clear, but we need a broken window, which I've got the perfect solution for. This is a spare tempered glass screen protector for a Nintendo Switch, and it's perfect. I'll mark the size I want and cut the excess off, scoring and snapping to create a clean enough cut, then I'll lay the screen protector on a foam backing and smack it with a ball stylus. This creates a fractured, natural-looking, about-to-shatter window that I could never hope to create on my own. With the window in place now, I can attach an outer shell that I made using some thin sheets of XPS foam cut and glued to size and painted with a metallic steel. And because I'm an absolute sucker for that rusty metal look, I'll go absolutely ham, again, with the rust and coat the entire metal surface. Then it's back to the silicone caulking to add a thick bead on top. To make that bead into water ripples, I'll take a nitrile glove, coat it in isopropyl alcohol, and give it the old pokey pokey. Last but not least, to finish off the cracked glass, I'll take a tiny dab of UV resin and apply it to the bottom of the window and along the crack, heating it up with a heat gun to help it flow more naturally, making it look like my window is just about to shatter. And with that, we're all done here and on to the Glamour Shots. As always, a massive thank you to the fine folk over on Patreon who continue to support this channel, and a very special "oh hey there, how you doing, eh?" to the newest of them. Flicks to King, Miss Chell Lavelle, O'Shizzle Gizengard, Punk Salad, Liam Joyner, Curly Fry 001, Man in Tin, Spider Dad, Brennan Painter, The Oubliette, Blair Kearney, Jamie Dormus, Eva Loves Wally 26669, Jessica Shrestha, Tara, Merlindiana Jones, Steve 44880, Crispy Arts, John Mancuso, KPL, Lauren Fletcher, Hunter Scarlet, Ziaran, Adventures of Henry and Peter, Sarah Likes Love, Silver Fiend, Sparkly Unicorn 23, M. Brown, Robert Fortner, Brendan Kennison, Jess Star Broader Kaiju, Rewolf, and Bo Jingles. You are the almost broken glass window that barely manages to keep this cannonball firing shark of a channel contained. I guess this is another one for the weaponized animal, so let me know in the comments below what you want to see next. Otherwise, we'll see you next time. Cheers.